Hi everyone, welcome to Academia.edu's Open Science Speaker Series. It is super exciting to have you here. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Academia.edu is a distribution and peer review platform for academic research. Our mission is to accelerate the world's research. The company was founded about 10 years ago, and since then, about 75 million people have joined the site and have uploaded about 23 million papers. We think there are about 100 million papers out there, so about 20% of the way there. We actually have a big announcement to make today, which was that we released our mobile app on the iOS platform globally. So you can go to the App Store and type in Academia.edu and click on this beautiful A logo to open the app, and is a news feed of all the research you're following on Academia. I want to give a shout out to the amazing team that built this app, David, Thomas, Ahmad, and William, supported by incredible design teams. So thank you very much for your amazing and hard work. There are many wonderful companies that are working in the open science space, and we convened this speaker series because we wanted a way for people who are interested in open science to see what's happening at the cutting edge of open science. Tonight's speaker is Lenny Teytelman. Lenny did his PhD with Michael Eisen in genetics. Michael is also known for having founded PLOS, the open access journal. Lenny then did a postdoc at MIT and went on to start protocols.io after that. Lenny is a fantastic guy, and I can't wait to hear from him. He's going to speak for a bit, and then there'll be a chance to ask him questions.
Thank you, Richard. I tend to wave my arms when I talk, and I might be waving the microphone. If I do that, just someone wave to me and let me know not to do that. So as Richard said, and again, thank you for the invitation, for starting the series. As Richard said, I'll talk a little bit about methods and what we are focused on at Protocols.io as part of our attempts to improve how we communicate science and increase the reproducibility of what we publish. So I'll talk a little bit, just introduce what the problem is, but then after I talk about our efforts at Protocols.io, I also want to zoom out a little bit in the last third of this, and maybe 10 minutes, talk a little bit more generally about reproducibility and what are some of the other challenges, and hopefully then there will be questions and discussion. So, how many of you have, over the last couple of years, seen headlines like this in the media about challenges of reproducibility? So, a lot. And this is, Economist, Forbes, New York Times. This came up in Congress. NIH had to talk about it. And I personally don't think that we have some new crisis of reproducibility. I think that we have a new awareness of the challenges that we've always had in science. So when somebody publishes their results of research, for somebody else to take that paper and go in their lab and replicate the same result, it turns out to be really hard. And I don't think, as I said, I don't think that this is something that's new. I think that it's always been hard. I think it's always been hard. But we have a new visibility, thanks to all of the attention to this, we have a new visibility about the challenges. And what all of this reporting has led to is an interesting initiative that started in 2013. One of the things it has led to is an initiative called the Reproducibility Project Cancer Biology, which was over $1 million to Science Exchange, which is a company not far from us, and Center for Open Science, to take the top 50 papers that have been published in the top journals in cancer biology, papers that came out between 2010 and 2012, and independently just try to reproduce the key result of each published paper. So not new work, but it's a replication study. They picked 50 papers, and Unfortunately, they had to stop short. So they started in, as I said, 2013, picked 50 papers, and not too long ago, they announced that they are stopping the program with just 18 out of the 50 papers. Right, so we learned a lot of really interesting things from this effort, but one of the key reasons that they had to stop at 18 is because for a lot of the papers, they couldn't actually get the protocol. And the protocol is just a recipe. In the kitchen, it's a recipe, and you have ingredients of potatoes and carrots for your soup. In the biomedical laboratory, it's called a protocol, and instead of carrots, we have chemical reagents. So for a lot of these papers, if you want to step by step replicate what the people did, you need to know what they did. And it turns out that our papers, even though theoretically they should include this information, they don't. And the people participating in the project try to chase down those details and often couldn't. So here's some reporting on this. And Ed Yong in The Atlantic, the last part, he wrote that the hardest part by far was figuring out exactly what the original labs actually did. Scientific papers come with method sections that theoretically ought to provide recipes for doing the same experiments. But often those recipes are incomplete, missing out important steps, details, or ingredients. In some cases, the recipes are not described at all. Researchers simply cite an earlier study that used a similar technique. And covering this in Nature, in many cases because the protocols, had been developed by students or postdocs who were no longer in the lab. You can't get those details, right? No one knows what exactly was done. And if you don't know what exactly was done, you can't replicate it exactly and then say about whether you're getting similar results or not. So this is a challenge that we learned about through that effort. Here are some examples of the challenges of papers, how they're described from the eyes of the perspective of researchers. So here's a biomedical scientist saying, I'm looking for a protocol in the 97 paper, it's described in 96, finds 96 papers, described in 87, finds 87 paper, paywall, it's too old, the university doesn't have subscription to it, so you can't get that paper. That's a biomedical scientist. I have like a whole long collection of these that I bookmarked. I'm not going to take you through all of them. Examples, here's a physicist. 2017, devices were fabricated as previously described, previously described, previously described, as previously described. Original reference, devices were fabricated with conventional methods. So, good luck. And the last, this is not a tweet, but a blog post on this theme that is probably my favorite from a professor in Canada, which says that our method sections, typically in published papers, are kind of like, we draw out on 60.2 GSM white paper with the A4 dimension using 3H and 6B graphite pencils, Cumbria UK. We did so by looking at owls and drawing what we saw on paper. This protocol included one drawing. And that's the state of the art, unfortunately, which means that if you take an average paper, what you need to do in order to repeat it is contact the authors and try to get the protocol from them, what we saw the reproducibility project doing. So not trivial, and we can do a lot better. And so since 2012, when we had the idea for Protocols.io, we launched it in 2014. Our vision has been to make it easier to capture these details, as you're doing the work, and then make it easy for you to share the exact recipe as you're publishing. So you submit the paper, here's the editor-in-chief, York, say hi, of PLOS ONE. You submit your paper, and we actually have a partnership with PLOS ONE. It was the first major publisher to connect to Protocols.io. Thank you. And we make it very easy then for somebody else picking up a PLOS ONE paper, if it has a link to the detailed recipe, we make it very easy for people to know what was done. I will, if the internet cooperates, I will spend just a few short minutes, you can see this, to show you what this looks like. This is open access, free to read, free to publish. I can answer questions at the Mixer about business model or Q&A. Every protocol that you create by default is private to you, just like Google Docs. You decide who you're sharing with an individual, what permissions they have, view only or edit, what they can do with it, and you decide when to make it public, if you want to make it public, right? So that's how it works. So if I'm submitting a paper to +1, at the point of submission, I might flip the switch and get a DOI, document object identifier, that makes it easy to cite. I put it to my manuscript, reviewers can look at it, and when the paper is published, people can navigate to that recipe. Just as an example, so this is an example that I like to show of a protocol that is from a student in Australia. And one nice thing about these is these are not PDFs, these are not static pages. These are dynamic and interactive. So you can engage with the protocol. Every protocol at the very top has a run button. And just like Academia.edu, we have a native app on iOS and Android. It's free, you can download it, and you can run these protocols as you're doing the experiment. So it's sort of like a cooking app. As you're making the stew, you can see I'm done with the carrots, now I need to chop the onions. And if you change anything while you're doing the work, you can easily capture the details of what you've done on that day. Right? So that's one nice part. The other part is that you can see that half the screen is taken up by a communication window. So you can ask questions which will go not just to the author, but to everybody who's using this protocol, everybody who has bookmarked it, everybody who, that is so nice. I could have done that, but I didn't think about it. Too focused on this. Thank you, William. So you can ask a question and it goes to everybody who's run it on their phone, who has bookmarked it, and you can have discussions. And what I like about this example is you can see here is here's a step, and it says, step 24, where are you? There it is. It says air dry your cells for somewhere between 2 and 2 minutes using a 7-minute timer. So if you're trying to do that, that's a little bit confusing as an instruction. And someone reading it, ask what exactly does that mean? That went to everybody using the protocol. The author replied saying, whoops, that's a typo. Right? So you have this sort of public FAQ that's now building up on the protocol. She replied that this is a typo, and for me, it's really important that then with a click of a button, she was able to create a new version of it. The old one is still there, so anyone navigating to it from a published paper can see exactly what was reported and done back then. But you can keep these up to date, and so she creates version 4. And now if we go down to that step, you can see that it says 2 to 3 minutes, and the timer is 2 minutes instead of 7, so you've corrected what it was. For me personally, this is really important because the reason I'm not doing research right now with Protocols.io is that my experience at MIT was this protocol. This is a single cell microscopy technique, and the first year and a half of my postdoc went into correcting just one step of this protocol. It's very hard for me to show this step because I'm holding the microphone with one hand, but there, I managed. So right here, the highlighted step, it just says, instead of 1 carrot, use 5, and instead of boiling for 10 minutes, boil for 30 minutes. That's it. That's a year and a half of my life. But the crazy part is, this is not a new technique. This is a correction of something that's previously published in Nature Methods. So that means there's no new paper, so I don't get any credit for this year and a half, but more importantly, everybody else who's using this method is either getting completely misleading results or has to spend a year or 2 rediscovering that you need 5 carrots instead of 1. It's kind of crazy that there's no, yes, question, go ahead.
Yeah, so are you requiring authors to list lot numbers and catalog numbers for every item that you're using?
Great question. So how specific do we make
Or
these
club
protocols?
numbers even for anybody?
So so the question is, how much specificity are we asking for when people are saying is it an organic carrot? Is it a baby carrot? What did you use exactly, right? We make it very easy to share this. We encourage people to share it. We don't require it because not every protocol has those kinds of reagents. We are not a journal. We don't peer review every protocol. So I'll show you now at a point where we get 1,000 new protocols every month, which is great, but it doesn't scale. So we work with journals, and hopefully when the paper gets submitted, right, that if it's going through review, people look at it, but ultimately, these details come out as people try to use the protocol, and what we see more and more is people coming in and saying, what concentration did you use? Where did you order it? So if people miss that, we leave it up to the community to police that. Very good question is, which reagent from where is a very important part of this. So anyway, that's what I wanted to show on how the platform itself works. And then there is a compare button if you have multiple versions, where you click it and it shows you what was in version 1, what's in version 2, what's the same, and what's different between the steps. So we're still preserving the information, but we make it easy to share those corrections and optimizations exactly as I showed you. And that really is, for me personally, just as important as getting the details out there in the first place, because this is biology. By the time the paper is published, from submission, it takes an average of 9 months. Plus one is not doing a lot better than that, but it takes a long time, and by the time your paper is published, you've probably optimized your method. Instead of 30 degrees, you're using 35, it works better, and certainly a year later, somebody else in the lab, or in another lab, or in the lab that published the paper, has optimizations and corrections. So these are just key parts of the functionality. There's nothing more boring than an exhaustive talk showing you a tool. So we'll come out of the live demo, but there is one more thing that I do want to show, which is an example of what happens when you collect such information, not just in an individual paper, but in a central repository like Protocols.io. It's kind of like having a knowledge base like Wikipedia, what happens when it's all in one place. And here is a conversation. There is a researcher from Chile, Alejandro, who is asking, does anybody have an RNA extraction protocol for cortical neuron cultures? And a postdoc from UCSF says, oh, here's this specific method you should try. I see 5 such protocols on Protocols.io, and here's one that should work for you. And what I love about this particular example is that if you look, that's not me, good. If you look at the protocol itself, it accompanies a paper in the journal Gigascience, and the paper is on parasites of stickleback fish. It has nothing to do with cortical neuron cultures, right? But because it's not just sitting in this paper, this information, but it's sitting in a central Wikipedia-like place where everybody can access it, it allows people to compare the different methods, and maybe this was a paper on grasshopper and I'm using cockroaches for my work, but you can see what's been modified and will this work and what are the things that people are changing. So one of my favorite examples, there are now, PLOS was a lead on this, the first big publisher to connect to us, Public Library of Science, but there are now more than 400 journals that have added Protocols.io to author guidelines. So when you submit a paper, they encourage you to detail the recipes on Protocols.io and link to us, which is great. In biomedicine, there's 27,000 journals, so we only have 26,600 journals to go until we get perfect penetration. But this is a chart of how many people at the top, how many people are creating protocols every month, and at the bottom, how many different protocols we're getting now on a monthly basis. And it doesn't show, this starts about middle of 2015, because when we launched in 2014, that's just too depressing to show. But what you can see is, I'm sure people at Academia, and certainly Richard would appreciate, they know just what it takes to get off the ground, and how we all think of like, we'll build it, I'll tell my scientist friends that this exists, and they will all come and use it. And then you realize there's this like cold, hard winter of several years before anybody gives a shit. I get all the credit for the work that I don't do. I'm just like a professor. I'm not in the lab doing the work. I'm writing grants, right? So I am the CEO of the company, so I advise on what we should be doing, but these are the amazing people, including Anita, our head of outreach, who are actually in the trenches creating the tools and listening to the feedback from the users and making sure that this is something that serves the community and not just Lenny. We started a little bit late, so is it okay if I talk for a few more minutes? So obviously in all of this, I focused on methods, and methods clearly are an important part of the work that we publish and the challenges of reproducing work that other people have done. But methods are not all there is to it. So if you think about those who know about reproducibility, or if you just think about it, those who know about the challenges, what are other things that contribute to the difficulty of repeating something that someone else has done? Just shut up, raise your hand, say something. There are many. It's not just methods. I care a lot about methods, but it's not just methods.
Cell lines.
What is it?
Data.
Data. Data is important. PLOS ONE was the first big publisher to have a requirement for sharing data. Data, very important. We already heard reagents. Cell lines. What exactly, which organism did you use? A lot of the cell lines are mislabeled, so you think you're using pancreas cell. It turns out to not be. That's a common issue, but we can kind of group them. There are many more. We already mentioned that where you buy the carrot, like it might be baby carrot, the same size, but which store you bought it from can make all the difference on whether or not the experiment works. Right, so other things that make it hard. Yes?
The pressure to publish?
Incentives, yeah, so pressure to publish, maybe you're not being as careful. Right? So bad reagents, cell lines, exactly as you said. These are the technical factors. You're talking about rewards and incentives. We have such things as confirmation bias. We're all humans, so when we want to see something really badly, we're more likely to see that than how we report things, right? How we design our experiments and how we report them. Data is one example. There are more. This is probably not an exhaustive list of things that make it hard to reproduce science. And when you look at the slide, that's, I don't know how many people look at it and go like, oh, that's it? Piece of cake, we can solve this. It's a little bit depressing. I look at it in a slightly different way, and Richard and I have had conversations about it. Yes, but the good thing is none of these essentially are, none of these are new things, right? Like from the very first publications in scientific journals 350 years ago, it was always hard to repeat what Mendel did, right? You needed to get the protocols, you needed to get the same reagents. It was never easy. It wasn't easy to get the papers, it wasn't easy to get the materials, it wasn't easy to do statistics before anybody really thought about how do we do statistics on these things. And I try to think about it in positive light. Like, so these are not new issues, we've always had them. I don't think there's any evidence that today we are any worse at reproducing work than we were 30 years ago or 300 years ago. We might even be better. But despite all of these challenges that I showed on the last slide, science works. Right? So this is from Corey Bartman, who is a superstar scientist at Rockefeller and the president of the Chan Zuckerberg Science Initiative. And when she talks about accelerating science, she says, you know, it does work. Right? Like 82 years ago, no antibiotics, we didn't know smoking causes lung cancer, no transplants, right? No cataract surgery. and on and on and on. So we know that as messy and imperfect as the scientific research workflow and communication workflow is, it does work, it does give us the results, it does increase knowledge, but that's not the question, right? The question really is, given how amazing science has been in the last 80 years, where can we be in 82 years, and where can we be in 82 years by the end of the century if we can accelerate it, right? If we do peer review better, if we detail the protocols, if we publish open access, like how much, and then, you know, going back to the previous slide, there are obviously a lot of things to attack in there, but I think you can make a very compelling argument that this is not a time to be depressed and panicked about the state of science. This is a really good time with the internet, with mobile tools. I hear Academia released it now today. Right? Like, you couldn't have done that 10 years ago. This didn't exist. So I think we're just at a really good time to rethink some of the things. I don't think, my personal perspective is this doesn't require panic. I don't say science is broken. It works. I don't say that we're in a crisis. I think we have challenges. I think it's imperfect, and there's a lot we can and should improve, but I'm not pessimistic about it. And with that, I'll stop and take questions. Richard.
You mentioned incentives, and you run protocols, which is trying to get people to be way more transparent and upfront about the methods, the protocols. Can you speak a bit about the challenges around incentives? Like, sometimes you hear that academics and scientists don't want to share data, don't want to share their code or their protocols because they want to be scrutinized. What if there's a gotcha, a big mistake, or they want to milk the data set for more publications? Can you talk about your experience working with like the quagmire of incentives?
That's like 1 2-hour question right there. I'll try not to speak for 2 hours now. Incentives are really hard, particularly with scientists, and I think my perspective, and I've talked to, for example, Ivan Aransky a lot about it, who is the co-founder of Retraction Watch. He's a professor at NYU in science journalism. And incentives are hard, and there is fraud. I think from all of the challenges that we listed, he agrees with me that like fraud is the least of our concerns. It's our reputations are on the line. We do discover and uncover fraud, so it takes, there is Theranos, right? There are scams, but most of us are not on that level, right? Most of the scientists are not Bernie Madoff. So it exists, but the bigger problem, I think, when it comes to incentives is careers and lack of time, right? That scientists are just super busy, they're overwhelmed, things are taking way longer than they should, and when we ask them to change, so culture change, right? Change how you're doing things, how you're publishing, how you're keeping track of your records. When we ask you, it would be great for open science, not just to share data, but to share code. When you share code, you want to comment that, right? You want other people to be able to use it and understand your code. All of these things take time. Even protocols.io, it's a wonderful tool, but if you have your protocol in your lab notebook right now, to share it on protocols.io will take you time to sit down. It doesn't magically leap from paper into digital form. It'll take you 15 minutes. If your protocol has 100 steps, it'll take you an hour, right? So what do you, those are really hard questions. And I think scientists particularly are a tricky audience to get to adopt new things. It's a little bit surprising because we're at the cutting edge in the labs, constantly doing new things, pushing the boundaries, but the way we do them and the tools that we use, we settle into our ways and it's hard to get us to change. So I don't have a really good answer to some magic solution to this. Our approach at Protocols.io specifically has been that what we give you, Protocols.io, it can't just be for the good of the community. Like, you need to do this so that other people can benefit from your work. That's nice, but I need to do it, and it will take me time, and it's not really required by the journal, so why should I do it? So if you're coming to Protocols.io at the point of submitting a paper, you can have sort of sticks, you can have requirements, like the data policy at PLOS, which are necessary, but I think some of the biggest ways to move what scientists are doing, and there are a lot of people who are trying to fix how scientists are evaluated, so that you're not just judged by where you've published, but you're judged by what you've published, and that you get credit for the data and methods that you've shared and the software, right? So if 10,000 people are using the software that you shared on GitHub, that's impact, right? And even if it's not published, should you get some credit as an academic for that? There's a strong argument to be made that you should. So there are a lot of people thinking about that and working, but that's a whole other thing. At Protocols, for tools specifically, I think the best way to change behavior is if the tool serves the scientist and saves them time long before they need to publish, right? So the reason we have a mobile app, the reason it starts out privately and you can run it and we've built all of this functionality is around helping the scientist long before she needs to publish. She's just doing the work, they're organizing in the lab. And at this point, from the graph that I showed you, I think I said over there, most of the protocols that we get in the beginning are private. So every month we'll get 800, 900 private protocols and 100, 150 public ones, right? And I'm not depressed by that. I'm actually pretty happy because I want this to be something that's instantly useful. When we teach with a few collaborators, we've started reproducibility workshops that we run at conferences. We started this, I think, half a year ago. It's been like a 2-year effort with Eli, Hadjin, and Kodosh and other organizations to do this. And when we start, that's a workshop for students and postdocs. When we started, we take them through tools and we tell them, your most likely collaborator in 6 months is you yourself, right? So if you document what you're doing well, if you use an electronic lab notebook, it'll be easier for you. You'll be able to search, it'll save you time. There's initial investment, but it should serve you. So to me, a lot of the tools, even without thinking about incentives, if we can think incentives as in career rewards, but if we can think of incentives for using tools, right, and platforms that benefit the busy scientists, that I think has chance of adoption. So that wasn't 2 hours, but that was way too long. I apologize. Let's do more questions. You already mentioned reagents. We'll get back to you in a second, but first.
What are the challenges involved in convincing journals to integrate with Protocols.io?
In the beginning, as a startup, the main challenge is that everyone expects you to be dead in 6 months, quite reasonably. So what we found in the beginning when we went to journals is that they just said, that's nice, but once the paper's published, we don't care anymore. So we made no progress in the beginning, and we actually found an easier time partnering with the reagent vendors, right? The stores that are selling the carrots, because they all have protocols that come with their reagents, and they want to make sure that it works. They want to hear back from the scientist on what doesn't work and to optimize it. So it was easier for us to get content and partner with reagent vendors than publishers in the beginning. Once we got some traction, once we got a few journals, we started working with Public Library of Science on announcing the collaboration. And that happened in 2017. So like the first 3 years of Protocols.io, there were 2 journals that connected to us. PLOS took us from 3 to 10 in 2017, and then it's like a red light turned green. But when you ask about the challenge, you have to talk to the publishers, you have to talk to the editors, right? So 400 journals is great. To get to 27,000, we need to expand, we need to raise, we need to hire somebody from the publishing world, not me, I'm an academic, but someone with a Rolodex from the publishing world who can go to journals. It doesn't cost them anything. It's kind of a no-brainer, but again, just like things don't go viral in platforms, things don't go viral in partnerships. So the challenge there is not how to convince them. We've been a little bit lucky to start Protocols.io in 2012. Unlike all the other people that have tried to do this over the last at least 20 years, we've been lucky that we're doing it at the time when there's already so much attention to the difficulty, like the reproducibility, project cancer biology, all that coverage, because it's on the front of people's minds, is actually making it our job a lot easier to come. They're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It doesn't cost us anything. We'll add you to the guidelines, but you still have to do that. You have a question, please. And then
Sure. So statistics is one of your factors here. Is there a dedicated platform or portion of your protocols to statistics and figuring out how to best use statistics? It's one of our biggest plagues in biomedical science is using the right types of statistics to make sure that we're seeing something that's actually significant.
Yeah, that I think goes more into training, into the peer review, and less into the protocol itself. I'd be interested in what your thoughts on this are, but we make it easy not just to detail which reagents you used and what amounts and timers. We also make it easy to share the formulas, to share the software, right? Point to the GitHub repository, which data set you used, which version of the genome. So we try to make it easy to capture the information, but we are not the ones training people on how to do science and how to do the statistics well. I don't think we can do that. As far as quality control, when something goes public, we will review it. We will make sure it's not spam, scam, or pseudoscience, and we retract and filter daily those things. But for legitimate things, we can't go through the protocol itself. And if you have ideas for what we could be doing better to help the scientists who are entering protocols, but most of it has to fall in the labs and the universities and the training programs, I think. Jörg, do you have thoughts about it?
Something like registered reports, where you submit your protocol, the experimental study protocol, to the journal peer reviews that, and then says, if you follow the protocol, we will publish the paper. And then the scientist goes into the lab, does the work, and then submits the full paper, but you peer review the protocol or the experimental study design.
Yeah, so that's a really good effort. I'll repeat what Jörg just said, because I have the microphone. I'll get the credit for what you just said, because no one hears you.
Why don't you tell us who Jörg is?
Oh, Jörg is the editor-in-chief of PLOS ONE journal, which is, I believe, the biggest biomedical journal, or was a year ago, until Nature copied it and started competing. It might still be. So, don't quote me on still the biggest or not, but Jörg knows a lot about it and worked for Nature before 2 years ago coming to PLOS. So he knows all of publishing, whether open access or subscription. And what he just said is that there is a big push when it comes to statistics. There is a big push, an interesting push from the Center for Open Science mostly, to get people to submit the work that they're doing, called a registered report, not once it's been done, but when they just planned it, right? So you go through study design, you get your proposal peer reviewed as if it were a paper. You have no data yet, and you send it to the journal, and the editor sends it out to reviewers, and they are just looking at your protocol, why you're doing it, and what you're going to do, and they have no idea what the result is. They give you comments on it, yes, solid, or no. The editor makes a decision saying yes or no to the registered report based on the reviews and your response to them, as if it were a paper, but makes the decision before you've done the work. And if they've accepted it, what it means is that you do the work and you have a guarantee that it will be in whether the result is positive or negative, which is really cool. And it's an opportunity to peer review the statistics, how many animals, right, or cell lines you're going to use, how many times you're going to repeat the experiment, what your error bars are going to be, will this be enough to learn what you want to learn. So you're getting reviewers to look at your proposal before you've done the work. And that, I think, kind of like is going, it's attacking multiple problems in the space, including having somebody look over the statistics and getting you to think about the statistics before you've done the work. William?
Lenny, can you explain to us quickly why publishing negative results is important but rare?
That's another 2-hour question. So the question from William is, can I explain why publishing negative results is important and why it's rare? Why it's important, we can all imagine, because people try something, and if I don't tell anyone what didn't work for me, then you have to try the same thing again, and now 100 people are trying the same thing, and no one knows that it doesn't work, so next year another 100 people are going to try it, right? So intuitively, we all want to know what people have tried that didn't work. And one particular problem with traditional journals is that they want to publish new things, exciting, sexy things, new discoveries. And once they've published it, if it's wrong, they're not particularly excited about publishing your paper saying that one is wrong or maybe partially correct, because not many people are going to cite it, and now their impact factor is going to go down, and most people are not going to cite the original study anymore then, and yours is not going to be cited either because it just says that one is wrong. So journals don't have any strong incentives usually to publish things that are negative. In fact, 2006, when PLOS ONE was launched, one of the motivations for launching the journal of PLOS ONE was that it would accept negative results. Because it's not judging by impact, it's not judging by trying to predict how many people will cite the work, it's just sending it out for review, kind of like, a little bit like registered reports. Do we believe it or not? Were the right methods used? Did you do the controls? Is it sound science is what PLOS ONE checks for, and then it's accepted based on the science, not whether it's positive or negative, exciting, and 1 million people will read it or 100 people will read it, which is really cool. But the second part of the question is, why is it so difficult? Those have not been exactly forthcoming. So PLOS ONE takes them. Some people do publish them. We now have, in addition to PLOS ONE, we have a preprint repository where you can go and share a manuscript without peer review. You can just make it available to everyone. We have Figshare. We can just add a PDF and say, I've done this. This is what I see. And even though we have PLOS ONE, and even though we have preprints, and we now even have, I actually wrote a whole article called The Quest for Negative Results. We have lots of journals that have been started called the Biomedical Journal of Negative Results, right? Or the Journal of Negative Results. There have been many of those. Most of them get exactly 0 submissions every year. And so what we've learned is that the problem isn't so much having a space to publish negative results. There's no space to publish them. I think the reason we don't see too many of them is, one part is rewards and incentives. How likely, a positive, sexy result in a big journal, famous journal, is career-making move sometimes. How much time do you want to take writing out negative results that maybe not so many people will see, and it won't go into a famous journal? So until those journals start, not just PLOS ONE, but until the original journal, until Nature starts welcoming negative results, there's not as much incentive to write it up. And another problem is when we as scientists are doing something that's exciting. So there's many things that contribute to it, but the last thing I'll say is, when we have a new exciting result, we are going to do everything we can, most of us, to make sure that it's robust, it holds up, I can repeat it, it's reproducible, at least in my hands, before I write the paper saying, yeah, this is a real result. When something doesn't work for you, you're trying to repeat something from another lab, you try it and maybe their paper is wrong, or maybe you screwed up in trying to reproduce their results. Maybe you got their protocol but it doesn't have all the details, and maybe you called them up, and maybe you need to fly to Australia and spend a month in their lab to make sure that you're doing things the same way. But the burden of proof is really high, right? And so when we get a negative result, if it's tentative, are we going to repeat it 10 more times? Are we going to invest in it? Or as a graduate student, am I going to say, you know what, I've tried it twice, maybe it works, maybe not. I'm not sure, I'm going to switch to something else. And the tricky part is that there may be, each individual experiment, each individual scientist trying it once, that's not statistically significant to show that a particular paper is wrong. However, if 1,000 different scientists have tried it and none of them can repeat that result, we're not talking necessarily to each other. There's no registered database of negative results where you can just ping this, right? So we don't have any red flag that goes up because many people tried it, and it's really at conferences, word of mouth, that it turns out like, oh, that paper is crap. These 3 top labs couldn't reproduce it, and then it's word of mouth, negative result, but it doesn't get published still, right? Because each individual lab that has done it. There are obviously exceptions to this in really important instances. People will push back, and Science and Nature will retract things, and they will publish corrections, like arsenic DNA or the step. There are some scandals that we can point to, some quite unfortunate, where we do correct. But at the end of the day, it's a really hard problem. It could be massively beneficial to science if we got more. This is a problem that's not been on the radar since 2012. This isn't, I think in the 70s or 80s, it was described as the file drawer problem. Negative results get shoved into a file drawer and they never see the light of day. It's a massive thing that could be improved. We don't know in protocols.io how to improve it. Journal of Negative Results doesn't necessarily improve it. It's a harder problem that I don't have an answer for. Other questions? Yes.
I really love this. So I feel like we've talked about science that's hard to reproduce, but another problem is science that's reproducible but not representative, and I think that protocols really come in there. So like, I work in neuroimaging, which is the voodoo of protocol world, and worse than that, so I work in MEG, there's only 70 of these machines in the world, no one knows what protocols they should be using, and even in my lab, all 10 people are using their own code, their own protocols, and what happens is, if you fail to reproduce a result that someone else has produced, people are like, oh, well, how did you do it? Oh, you've probably done it wrong. And that's just, again and again, that's what happens. And so there's a sort of funny role between our protocols and actual data, right? And so it can be a really sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're not getting the result you want, you just change your protocol until you get it, until you get the result you want. And those are the protocols that become popular. And they become the one of the lab, and they become the cited from 98, from 90, all the way back. So my question is, how do we rate protocols on this platform? Is it user rated? Is it how many people have used it? How do we stop ourselves from falling in that bubble?
Great. So great question. There are lots of different variants of a protocol, even inside a lab. And you're also talking about the issue of robustness. So there's reproducibility, which is trying to just copy the exact same thing that was done, but there's reproducibility of the same lab or the same person trying to repeat it, and then there's robustness. Can other people do it? Does it work on other organisms? Does it work in other people's cancer? There are variations of this. And your question was, if there are multiple protocols on protocols.io, how do you know which one works? And scientists sometimes ask us, how do you ensure validity and truth? Or another variant of this question is, do you have thumbs up and thumbs down on protocols, rating? And it's really tricky. So we don't do thumbs up or thumbs down because we don't really want to become the YouTube of protocol comments. And there are passions and competitors and competing reagent vendors and competing labs, right? We don't want friends coming to upvote a protocol. We don't want your nemesis coming to downvote and say this protocol is crap. So we allow commenting, but you have to sign in, you have to give your name or your ORCID ID, so we want an identity. You can fake your name, but we do require you to register if you're going to ask a question or comment. But that's not a number, right? And we don't do peer review, but I would even say that, in fact, even in journals, even in really good journals, which check the soundness of science and send it to reviewers, if I review a paper, I will look at the methods section and I might tell you that you're missing some details important, but I'm not going into the lab to see if what you described will work for me and will work in my lab. So I think ultimately the answer is that peer reviewing methods specifically is a function of time, and probably papers in general. Peer review in a journal improves papers, and it can beat out real crap and bad design and lack of controls. But it improves papers. It doesn't, peer review cannot certify something as the truth, right? It takes time and other labs and other scientists. So my answer to your question, what do we do at Protocols.io, is what we do is we expose on every single protocol, we have a metrics tab, and we try to give you as much information as we have about each protocol. How many people are commenting, how many people are bookmarking it, right? So that's the metrics tab. How many people are running it on their phone, how many people are exporting. So if you search for something, to me, again, it doesn't stamp a protocol as correct, but over time, if people are using it in the lab and running it on their phones, that's useful information. And that's the kind of peer review and the sort of implicit word of mouth that's telling you this is likely to work. But that's sort of an escape answer. The reality is, until you try it, you don't know. And my honest answer is, we don't know that any protocol is correct and works, but at least now it's part of the paper and the details are out there, and at least now somebody can go and try to repeat it and has the recipe for doing it. But we don't know it, only it's a function of time.
So the forks is when someone makes an edit and you update it, is that right?
Yes, so there's versioning for the author, but you're absolutely right. I can't change your protocol, that would be kind of messed up. But what I can do to your protocol is click the fork button and create my own clone of it. So that's a copy button, it becomes private, I can change it as I want, and then I can click publish and say, what's different, what did I optimize, what did I do, and again, the same compare button that works for versions, it works for the original and the fork. So we try to encourage people, instead of downvoting or upvoting, to share what does work, to share their optimizations, to have the conversation, and we try to expose the metrics, all as signals of quality and sort of increasing trust, but it's hard, it takes time. Excellent question. I think there's still, it's 1 minute to 8.
Well, we started.
I'm not running away.
Yeah, we started a bit late, so.
We can take more questions, or we can continue the discussions over drinks, so
It's
totally up to you.
a few minutes, yeah.
There's another question.
Even the scientist publishes, say, in PLOS One, and the article is accessible through Academia, and the scientist has, through protocols, revealed the author's associated protocol. How is that discoverable if one sees on Academia the citation, the associated?
How do you, so the question is, a study was published in PLOS One. I find the paper on Academia.edu under the professor's or postdoc's account. They've also shared a protocol for it. How do we connect all of these things? And actually the colleague of Jorg, the executive editor from PLOS, Veronique Kiemer, I've asked her, like, what do you see as the future of publishing? And she said, I see the future of the scientific paper. The paper is sort of like part of the puzzle, the centerpiece, and it's sort of the story that connects them to all of the other parts of the puzzle. So it's a big puzzle that should connect to the data and the code and the reagents. What about the plasmids? What about the cell lines? Well, they should be in a repository, in a freezer somewhere where it's trusted, where you know that you can get it even if that lab closes down, not just the protocols, right? So the reagents. So the paper is sort of the glue that should link out, point out to all of these places. And here's just one example. Here's one example. So here is a paper from +1. Oh, I forgot to say we have videos inside the steps, so you can shoot a video of what you're doing in the lab and upload it, not just images and tables. But what we tell you is, it's all linked. What we tell you is that this is from a +1 paper. Right? You can click on it and go right to the paper. The +1 paper points right back, and when you go to the materials and methods, you can't read any of it, but the answer is there, right at the top of the paper, data availability. It says the collaboration protocol is on protocols.io. Here's the link. So the paper is that centerpiece that should point out to all of the resources that you need to reproduce the work. And if I find it on Academia, wherever I find it, PubMed Central or directly on +1, that manuscript should have those link outs. And what's also awesome about this paper, not only do they have video protocols, they have code on CodeOcean, where you can click on it, and with a click of a button, you can rerun their code. You see all of the code, and you can repeat the analysis and regenerate the figures from the paper, or you can upload your own data set and run their code on your data, which is, that really is like, we're now pushing towards that edge of what's the future of publishing, right? Future paper. Yeah, just one more question on that.
Yeah, so you said it took a while before protocol submission really took off, and you said that, so I was wondering what lessons you learned and what encouraged people to submit protocols. You mentioned making them private and using it as like a lab notebook. I was wondering if there are other things you learned about how to grow.
Yeah, so I was in Canada just a couple of months ago, and I kid you not, I gave a whole talk. On the lessons learned and the challenges of growing a community and getting adoption for something like this. I'm sure Richard has. We are very open about sharing what does and doesn't work. I can't give another half-hour talk, but to summarize it, we've tried a million things for what Silicon Valley calls growth hacking, right? Driving users. We built other free tools to give to scientists. Then you build that tool and no one knows that that tool exists, and now you start a blogging platform on that tool to promote that tool that later will drive people to protocols.io. So the first year we're just like, well, we can't launch a crowdsourced thing without a crowd, we need a crowd. And we did all of these things to build a crowd through other tools, and we somehow managed it, and it was crazy, insane. I do not recommend doing it. If you want to build Academia, build Academia. If you want to build protocols, build protocols. But we spent a year building the crowd for protocols.io, and then we launched protocols.io, and there is that crowd, but that crowd signed up for other tools. They didn't sign up for protocols.io, so they're like, okay, thanks. 5 people out of those 3,000 go to protocols.io. Maybe we should have just done protocols.io. So that's one lesson we learned. We did a Kickstarter, which was an experience. I don't think I ever slept as little for an entire month as during the Kickstarter. I learned a lot about crowdfunding. It was very exciting. We succeeded, and then all of those people have accounts, but that's 800 people at the end of the day that through your exciting Kickstarter joined, and that's when you learn that, oh, maybe maybe things don't go viral, right? Like that's one important lesson. It's hard work, it's partnerships, it's thinking about what do the users need, what will make them tell their friend about it, how do you incentivize them to talk about it, how do you get partners that will point to you? So I talked about, we realized for something like protocols.io, it's called the cold start problem, right? Like the first telephone is kind of useless unless somebody else has a telephone. It's neat, but you can't call someone. So on something like protocols.io, what we quickly realized, people come there and the first thing they do is not click create and share their wonderful method. The first thing they do is they search exactly for a method that they use, and until we get those methods, they're not going to come, right? Now, but why would you come and share the method if no one is coming to the platform? It's like Airbnb. Why would you list an apartment if no one is coming to rent? But why would you go to Airbnb if no one is listing? So it's a catch-22 cold start problem. It's severe for something like us. So we have to figure out how to get the content that scientists need, find the partners, and it's just seriously a half-hour talk of what we've done. And it's great, but without massive injection of funding, I don't remember if I acknowledged, we have amazing grant funding, we have some philanthropic grant funding, we have about $1 million that we raised from angel investors just to get started. But without a massive injection of funding, it's really hard to get users. So we have 100,000 views monthly, which is wonderful, and we're growing and we're doubling every year, but this year we've doubled from 12,000 registered users to 25,000. There's 5 to 10 million scientists, right? So we need to maintain that and kick it up to get to the millions registered users. And then you have the problem that most people are coming now. We have thousands of protocols, but most people are coming to consume knowledge. Then how do you get them to create an account, to contribute, to participate, to answer questions? Speaking of answering questions, let's do one more, and then I will still be around, and we can continue the discussion. Yeah.
This is awesome, by the way. What's the bottleneck for protocols now? Is it capital? Is it people? Is it some Archimedes lever in the product that you have to build? What's the switch to get this to the 5-10 million sites?
The question is, what's the bottleneck now for protocols.io? What do we have to do next? And capital is always a problem, right? Until you're massively profitable. And I think even then, it's going to expand and have a nice office. We're in WeWork, 6-person office, and the other people are off-site. So there are bottlenecks on development, there are bottlenecks on employees, sure. But I think the biggest bottleneck is, one, moving from partnerships with 400 journals to 30,000 biomedical, and then if we're going into chemistry and physics, right, and psychology, that's not biomed, that's not PubMed Central, that's more than 27,000. So that would be nice. But the biggest focus for me right now, like I kind of feel that over these years, when you look at the graph, we've done well, we have content, it's growing even without me getting new journals. Like we've gone from 5% of our traffic being from Google to now 60% of our traffic being from Google because we have content. And that's a positive loop because the more content you have, obviously the more people find you, the more people find you, the more accounts will be created and the more people will share. So I feel like even if I don't want to say anything bad happened to me, but if something did, that will still grow. So for me, the biggest challenge is getting it to the point where I don't have to rely on the generous support of More Foundation and Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, getting into sustainability. We do have a business model, I didn't talk about it, but it's kind of like GitHub. If you're sharing it publicly, it's free. If you want private protocols, you get 5 free ones, and then you either have to make them public or you have to pay. So there is a business model, but having a business model is easy. Executing on that business model and getting to a point where you're covering your expenses and become profitable is very hard. And So that's for me to do the next 1 2 years. The first years I could blame Alexei, my co-founder, who derailed my entire academic career with one phone call in 2012 saying, hey, can we build something on the site for scientists while you're doing the postdoc? Here we are, and I'm not doing the postdoc anymore, but he's amazing. But before I could blame things on him, like we need this on the platform, we need that, but the platform is amazing now. So the next bottlenecks are on me as the CEO to make sure that we don't have to keep asking for grants. Trent?
Thank you, Lenny.
Thank you for the invitation, and thanks to all of you for asking the questions. Nothing is more enjoyable than answering and really engaging, so I absolutely love this. Thank you, Richard, thank you, Academia, and mostly thanks to you for asking the questions and sitting through it. So.